Welcome to our last module. Let's conclude the course with a focus on the future and what a critical political economy can tell us about the social challenges that we face, the social challenges we'll continue to face in decades to come, and what can it tell us about the changes that are necessary in our societies. I'll go first with a couple of thoughts about some of the challenges that we face and how we can try and chart a way forward. We are a unique species, capable of changing ourselves and changing the environment in which we exist. There's a lot of potential there for wonderful things and for terrible things. Climate change is one of those terrible things. Now, our ability to do something about climate change is not a scientific problem. The science is all there. It's a social problem. Our ability to manage our relationship with the planet responsibly hinges on our ability to manage our relationships with ourselves. How do we organize production and consumption in ways that promote measures of human fulfillment? In ways that not only take care of basic needs of everybody, but enable people to live rich, long, and meaningful lives, and in ways that are sustainable. That requires us to reevaluate our reliance on markets and on self-interested, profit-driven decisions as the basis to organize our economies. That reliance on markets and market principles has given us a world where billions of people are unable to meet basic needs, because meeting those needs is not profitable. It has given us a world where a few are constantly encouraged to develop new conspicuous consumption needs, a new phone, a bigger car, a commercial-grade kitchen in your own home. Why? Because creating and satisfying those needs is profitable. That reliance on markets has also left too much political and cultural power in the hands of profitable industries and enterprises like fossil fuels. That gives them a great deal of influence over policy. They can manipulate public opinion. They can even define what is considered politically practical or expedient. Why? Because doing that is profitable. We need economies where communities are able to debate, to decide, and to pursue whatever material, cultural, scientific, or environmental outcomes or objectives their members want to pursue. You want an economy that provides food, housing, education, and medical care for all. Okay, no problem. It will probably save us resources in the long run. You want a rapid transformation of our energy systems? Well, no problem. We can redeploy resources and redeploy people in order to do that. You want to redesign our cities and towns so that we reduce transportation needs and promote the development of a sense of community, connection, and belonging. That's a great idea. Let's do it. It can also help people feel less dependent on conspicuous and unsustainable consumption as a way to try and become happy. It's no exaggeration to say that the next step in our evolution as a species is the development of social institutions that let us govern ourselves along those lines. Institutions that can ensure that as long as markets and market principles are necessary in our economies, they are tools working for society and not the other way around.
Great points, Paolo. Will, what are your thoughts on lessons for the path forward?
It's timely to think about the future because now we are seeing a strong backlash against neoliberalism, or what some call market fundamentalism. We've seen slow growth, historically high inequality, and a lack of economic development in large parts of the world. Unfortunately, the reaction against neoliberalism has also created a backlash against democracy in many countries, including in the US. Globalization and liberalization cannot be blamed for all the world's economic ills, but the performance of the liberalized world economy since 1980 certainly requires that we ask, can we design a global economic system that is more just and supports equity? Globalization is very advanced, but the form it takes is not inevitable. We learned that the way globalization was designed since the latter part of the 20th century was towards market deregulation, but skewed to empower corporations and financial wealth, often ignoring the plight of workers. In the module on globalization, we discussed a few broad proposals for a redesign of the global economy. These include a shift to domestic demand, a Marshall Plan for the 21st century from rich to poor countries serving infrastructure and environment-changing investment, financed in part by a global tax on corporate profits. An expansion of domestic policy space and away from the straitjacket of international trade agreements, and a redirection of the international financial institutions.
Will, if you could pick just one thing what is the most important thing to change?
If I had to identify one thing that really should change in society, it is the need to create countervailing power to the heightened role that corporations have played in our society. This requires not just changes in regulations and institutions, but a change in attitude. That is, that no one's earnings and wealth are separate from the society and the planet in which they are earned. Economic and environmental justice will require this changed attitude towards a common measure of well-being and resilience. The concept of countervailing power was first raised by economist John Kenneth Galbraith in the 1950s, referring to the power of U.S. corporations within the U.S. economy. It's time to consider building countervailing power on a global scale, not to diminish the role of nation-states and national democratic practices, but to be sure that the international inequities in development and global causes of environmental degradation can also be addressed. We might do well to embrace the thinking of philosopher John Rawls, who argued that society is only as well off as its least well-off person. In light of our concerns with the environment of the planet, we might even extend Rawls's views to think about how we can allocate resources now so that we enjoy a trajectory of improvement and climate health in the future. Teresa, you also had some great lessons in your module. What would you identify for the path forward?
Thanks, Will. In my lessons, you heard and saw that I am critical of most nations' treatment of workers and workers' families. Just like in the dominant economic frameworks, workers are treated as just another factor of production. Workers are treated like paper clips, lathe machines, or coffee makers in the break room. Instead, I constructed an economic framework that is relevant to today's problems. My framework is fairly mainstream, but that framework has been suppressed by free market ideology and corporate power. After the Great Depression, when governments responded to the popularity of communism and the near devastation of the capitalist system, they focused on power balance. A power balance view is foundational for a thriving human society. Many living economists now share that view. Economists like James Galbraith, Joseph Stiglitz, David Card, and Heather Boushey. The economic framework I support is one that recognizes selling labor services to employers are people, just people, and many of these people live in families.
You also highlighted market structures in your module. What's the path forward for that lesson?
Thanks, Will. The economic framework needs to acknowledge that most people work for giant oligopolies and monopolists, not small little competitors. Workers and labor need institutions that nurture their countervailing monopoly, that power balances. By strengthening institutions that make labor a countervailing monopoly, we put people front and center in all of our policies. In fact, I was very critical in my module of the variety of capitalisms we have now because labor, in many of them, simply does not have enough power. Will, you also mentioned the one thing you would change. I also reflected on that while wrapping up this course. If I could change one thing, it would be a strong labor movement in coalition with an environmental movement. We need a blue-green alliance everywhere. Only when climate change policies bring working people to account and vice versa, we can have a path towards a sustainable and resilient future. I can't help but repeat an all-important point. There is a possibility to build a democratic society where preferences for the poor and working classes dominate. Paulo, what about you? What is the one thing you think needs changing in society or in thinking?
Individualism, not in the common sense of the word, but as a way of understanding the world. People today tend to think of economic and social outcomes exclusively in terms of individuals, their choices, and their actions. But individuals, their choices, and their actions have a social and historical context. Without that context, we will tend to judge those who are successful too generously and judge those that are not successful too harshly. You end up with a very conservative and pro-status quo way of understanding the world. People need to become comfortable with taking a step back and thinking about the social processes that give us any economic outcome. Where did your breakfast come from? Why is it difficult for a single mom to put in overtime at work? Why is it so easy for children of wealthy families to become wealthy adults? Why did my neighbors lose their home in 2009? Those are the questions worth asking. Those are the questions that will get you in trouble, because those are the kinds of questions that will take you to the core social relationships that shape our economic lives.
We hope this course allowed you to think a little more critically about economics. The question is now yours to answer. How will you be part of the path forward?